G'day ladies and gentlemen, shooters. I found myself an old anvil that I have been using outside on a retaining wall stump for a few months, and I'd like to make it a little bit nicer because I tend to use it a lot, and it's an old farrier's anvil, and the farrier has used it to mould his Corsican shoes, so all of the sides, the hardened steel face have been broken off, chipped off, and also the bending component here has had a huge chip taken out of it. I'm not going to go doing a fabulous professional job of this because it's still going to stay outside. I'm going to mount it to a piece of hardwood stump that I cut off a neighbour's driveway, and give it a bit of a coat of paint, draw file the face so it's a bit flatter. Just use some mild steel welding rods to put a sharp edge on here because I will only be using it to bend sheet metal, and we'll see how long it lasts and whether it warrants me trying to find a bigger, heavier anvil that will serve me a little better in the future. Okay, so I have been heating this anvil with a MAP gas torch for about 45 minutes now, and it's only just starting to hiss when I apply some water to it. I don't have a thermometer or any temperature chalk or anything like that to figure out exactly how hot I've got this. So I'm just going to have a crack at it now and see what happens. It's either going to weld nicely and stay true, or it's going to weld and then the top piece of tempered steel is going to delaminate more so from the base cast iron like it has already and make a big mess. But I'm dealing with what I've got, and this is either a how-to video or a how not to video. So let's see how we go. So at this point I have rough ground all of the edges flat. Whilst doing this, using a grinding disc, make sure you try and keep the center line of the disc below the lip. If you go above the lip, you will start to chew into the anvil surface. If you keep it below the lip, then you're using the side of the anvil, which is already, or should be already, machined relatively flat. You're using that as a guide to keep your grindings nice and straight. Now, a precision anvil would have a ground surface and ground sides. This has got a ground surface, and you'll notice I haven't yet used any grinding on the surface. You have to use a mechanical grinder very sparingly on the surface because this original surface was ground with a machine and would be within very fine tolerances. If I use this, those tolerances are gone. So don't flap this, clean the surface of your anvil, don't use a grinder. Use a wire brush on a drill. I wouldn't even use a wire brush on an angle grinder because we don't want to remove any of this material. When it comes time to removing this material, yes, very sparingly use your angle grinder to get it down close. But be very careful because any nicks are going to destroy this surface. Once it's close, we're going to use a bastard file to draw file it nice and flat, using this original surface as a guide. That way we should maintain this surface and keep it nice and square. The surfaces down the side, I just simply use a straight edge or a level here and keep eyeing it off so that I can see where the high points are. So I'm still a bit high here. Unfortunately, this anvil, it was a farrier's anvil, so it wasn't really made very square in the first place. But I'm going to try and get it as close as possible without again destroying the surface. The next and final thing to do is don't grind off all of the welds if you know that you haven't got enough built up material on a spot. If you grind it all and make it all perfectly square everywhere and then find you've got a low spot later on, you have to build up around that low spot and then fill that low spot before it's welded and ready to go again. So then there's a whole heap of material removing happening all over again, and you don't want to revisit that process. You really want to concentrate and make sure you have all of that material built before you start grinding so that you're not going over old ground. And to do that, you just make sure by eyeballing down the side of the anvil once you've finished welding that there is a good formed bead past the point where the edge would be once it's machined back to square. And then you should be right. So I'm just going to go over this now with the level and the grinder, making sure that it's as close to square as I can. And then I'll take a small amount off the surface with the angle grinder, very, very carefully. And then I'm going to draw file it finished. Okay, draw filing. If you've never done it before, it's simply using a file in that direction instead of in that direction. In other words, we're moving the material off the block, running that way. Now, ideally you'd have a much bigger, better file than this one, but this is all I've got, and don't like buying new tools unless I desperately have to. So I'm going to make do with this. And what you're doing is you're trying to just keep it level, and as you start seeing, and you can give it quite a lot of force, but as you start seeing the material move and then those scratches appearing on the surface of the anvil, you know to move on to the next spot. Yes, it'd be nice to be able to draw across the whole thing. I can actually feel that out already. But you just work in a small area until you get down to that point and then move on. You can see here I'm focusing on my right hand side where the handle is because it's easier to get some pressure in there. Trying to keep the file from bending. If it bends, then it's removing material on the edges rather than nice and flat. This anvil is still pretty hot too, so I'm going to use a glove. But you can see the angle grinder's material removal has been that way, whereas the draw file, you can see it's removing it that way. You can see patterns here where it's already catching high spots. Unfortunately, from what I can see, so I've fill welded across here, but this bit of this surface had already begun to mould with hammer blows and other bits and pieces. I mean, I always have a little trough there, but it means that this surface isn't a very hard surface. But I knew it was a bit of a cheap anvil initially, so I don't think I paid too much for it.
there it is, one refinished old Anvil, ready to fight another day, and I managed not to completely stuff it up. The hammer blows still rebound as well as they did before the rework, and it now has reasonably nice square edges. As you can see, I was a little impatient to mount it to the log, so I mounted it with wet paint, and as a result I have Pinocchio vomit all over the side of the wet paint. So I guess if you've made it to the end of this one, please like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more content from Build, Grow, Play.